Look at me and tell me what you see. I look at you and tell you what I feel. Look at me and tell me what you see. I look at you and tell you what I feel.
What's up, everybody? Emperor John Kill 3D Gaming here, and before I get into what is going to be the main topic of this video, which will be the abomination Netflix's Resident Evil, I want to start off by explaining to everyone, and each and every one of you, I know you guys have watched me stream Resident Evil in the past. You've heard me talk about it on multiple occasions. You know, you've heard me talk about my disdain for the first 6 live-action films, the absolute praise that I give Welcome to Raccoon City, and the praise I also give the animated films, and hell, even Resident Evil's Infinite Darkness, which is unfortunately on Netflix, holds more weight than Netflix's shitty live-action adaptation. But Resident Evil holds a special place in my heart, as it does with all gamers, especially survival horror fans, zombie fans. You know, Resident Evil holds a special place in the hearts of the gaming community. Even though if you weren't a fan, you cannot deny the impact Resident Evil has had on the gaming industry since its inception. Whether through its ups and downs, Resident Evil has been a huge staying power, especially from Capcom. You know, so Resident Evil, like, to me, the reason why it was so special, it was one of the true video games, like, to me, one of the very first video games that really tested my skills as a gamer. Resident Evil 2, you know, even though I had a PlayStation 2 at the time, PlayStation 2 can play PS1 games, I sat there in the dark, played Resident Evil 2 for the first time, and I was instantly hooked. Granted, it took me a while to beat it because, I mean, even back then when you're trying to iron out your video game skills and you're just playing so many different titles and still trying to fine-tune what kind of gamer you are, I didn't know that survival horror would be a genre that I would eventually go back to later, because, let's be real, we all know how hard the Resident Evil games, the early Resident Evil games were. And I didn't start off with Resident Evil 1, like I said. I went with RE2. Well, 1, because it was passed down, handed down to me, so obviously I'm going to go through it and give it a go. But then I'm like, whoa, is this the game that people were telling me about? Because the Resident Evil 2 GameCube remake was around the time that I started playing Resident Evil 2 for the first time. Even though, obviously, you know, Resident Evil 2 came out in the 90s, I didn't have a GameCube at that time to play the remake as much as I had wanted to. The same with 4. So I started with what was the next best thing, or at least what was the best thing for me. Then the moment I got hooked into Resident Evil, I got a hold of whatever PS2 Resident Evils I can get at the time. That would be Outbreak, Outbreak File 2. What was the other one where you're on the ship and it's like you needed a gun con to play with it? Damn, that one slipped my mind. But then Code Veronica. And then I eventually got a hold of Resident Evil 4 on the PS2. And it's just insane how much those games really paved the way, especially for me moving into the horror genre. Because I'll admit, I was one of those kids that played PS2. You know, I played early movie license games. I played those early superhero games. I was always playing stuff that made me feel overpowered. You know, I used to play a lot of power fantasy games, like most of us. I mean, mainly us guys, what do we play back then? We played fighting games. We played Grand Theft Auto. We played racing games. We played something that always made us feel good and made us feel over the top and amazing, especially also early Dragon Ball Z games. Then when I moved into, at the time, what was the next gen of PS3, 360, you know, Wii, all that, that's when I played Resident Evil 5. And I was like, okay, it may not be what I thought it was, you know, horror. It went more for the action route, but since I played Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 4 had kind of warmed me up to being in more of an action sense, going down an action-oriented type of road. You know, I was like, oh, okay, it's a break from the horror. They're trying something new. Then we get into Resident Evil 6, which I know is the most at the time, one of the most controversial of the series. You know, I played the Dark Side Chronicles. I played Umbrella Chronicles when I had a Wii. I enjoyed those. It was great on-rails fun. I managed to get a chance to play Resident Evil 0 on a GameCube when I got a hold of it. But then when I got a chance to play the remake first was re-released on the 360, the PS3, and the PC before it came to the PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox, Series X, or whatever they call that one. Those games is when I really sat down and I managed to experience old school Resident Evil 1. And of course, I went back and played old school Resident Evil 1 later down the line when I was able to get a hold of it. But you had, basically, think about it like this. You had two categories of horror gamers at the time. Silent Hill gamers, Resident Evil gamers. And instead of going to Silent Hill, which you would think would be more up my alley because I do like supernatural horror, and I do like, the unknown. I like being in that kind of danger, suspense. Resident Evil, you go into it, it's more so battling with corporations and their bioweapons and over-the-top storylines that started from humble roots. Yes, the mansion incident, the Raccoon City incident. Then we do, the president's daughter being kidnapped, the incident in Africa, then the whole spreading of the C virus from 6. There's a reason why I'm leaving out 7 and 8 right now currently from this conversation, even though those are great games. They return to their roots. Resident Evil 7 is a spiritual successor back to Resident Evil 1, while Resident Evil 8 is a spiritual successor to Resident Evil 4. But I'm talking about the series all the way up, at least till 6, because 6 is where do they go from here? It was very contentious. And I still, despite its ups and downs, I still highly loved Resident Evil. And I can call it for its flaws. I can admit that. Most of the storylines are fucking ridiculous. They're insane. And at times, they're blatantly retarded. But Resident Evil had one thing. It had soul. There was a soul to it. It's kind of funny saying soul when it's about zombies who don't have souls. But bear with me now. Back then, zombies were very generic in other video games and in media. Zombies, pop them in the head, or by video game rules, you could shoot them anywhere and make them explode. Resident Evil is what made zombies feel like a very serious threat. Even from the classic game, classic Resident Evil 1, the zombies were a threat. Even with the, a lot of people seem to ignore this, but the Resident Evil remake, what it has over the original is, of course, the controls, the graphics, the atmosphere, the voice acting, etc. But what Resident Evil does is zombies are more than just zombies. Zombies are already soulless monsters. But then, how do you take a soulless monster that just wants to eat your brains and tear your flesh apart and turn it into something worse? Crimson Heads, BOWs, fucking Lickers, Mr. X, the Nemesis, the Tyrant. I'm like, back then I was like, what in the holy fuck am I dealing with? Because back then, Resident Evil monsters really would make you take a step back. Because we're so used to playing video games where we're going to get up in any kind of monster's face, blow their fucking brains out, slice them apart, beat them with our bare fists. We're used to doing stuff like that. Resident Evil is a franchise, even, yes, through some of its action-oriented games, you still need to take a step back and think. You need to actually assess your situation. Even with the modern ones, where a lot of people say, oh, you don't really have to manage your items that much. But it's smart enough that you do, because you will always be prepared for any situation. Shit, go into a Resident Evil game, especially on the hardest difficulty, and think you can go in gung-ho and blazing. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's people that'll do it out there, or those of us who have beaten the games multiple times where we can unlock unlimited ammo. But I'm not talking about unlimited ammo, and I'm not talking about unlocking all the extra stuff. I'm talking about going in bare bones with what you have. The game will kick you in your ass. And even though you would be like, why is there puzzles in these older games? Why did puzzles even need to be here? Because let's be real, if we can just blow and smash through everything and blow everything the fuck up, the games will be over just like that. What really made the games long, the older games mind you, was the amount of puzzle solving we had to do. Though they were unrealistic and sometimes ridiculous, they were very intricate. And they would force you to think. That's what Resident Evil wanted you to do. And this might sound controversial, but Resident Evil itself, especially its early games, even though it's about zombies, Resident Evil itself is a puzzle. Those games were a puzzle game in itself. You know, you had to solve these mysteries and solve of ways of getting through this level with the constant threat that something can come at you at any point. And this is what I'm talking about. The first three, the style of the first three. At any point, you are in jeopardy. Whether it be from the zombies, whether it be from the dogs, whether it be from the lickers, Mr. X, Nemesis, Tyrant, you name it, one of them is going to fuck you up. Okay? And those locations, the mansion will always be iconic. For me, it will always be the police station, you know, because Resident Evil 2 was the game that got me started. The police station, very iconic. Roaming the streets of Raccoon as Jill being one of my favorite female video game protagonists, and, you know, video game waifus, of course. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've stated that on multiple occasions anyway. Then, this is where the rabbit hole starts to go down. We ended up getting the first 6 live-action films by Paul W.S. Anderson. And I don't know who at Capcom was the idiot that decided to throw out George Romero's original script, because if you read George Romero's original script, he was originally the one that was going to direct, and he wrote the Resident Evil movie. And he was the perfect man for the job. You know why? Go back and watch the live-action commercials for Resident Evil 2. Yes, you can say they're cheesy, but George Romero knew where he was going with this. And if you go to his scripts, even though there were some minor tweaks to the original game's storyline, it falls under the fact of this. Certain things in a video game may not work in a film. And those were changes that any fan would have accepted. I highly recommend it. The script's easy to get a hold of, to read his script. You know, in honor of his memory, I recommend that you read that script. Then we got the first Resident Evil movie. And even then, when I watched it, I went in and I was like, okay, I'm going to give it a chance because I'm a fan. I like the games. But there's a point where you got to realize, why did they do it like this? And just because you throw in monsters from the games, references, lines, weapons, here's the problem. If the context for it doesn't make sense, then your movie falls apart. And that's the problem with the first 6 Resident Evil movies. And that's why context will always be king. Because that's the one thing those movies lacked, was context and sidelining characters and the plot lines just to give everybody an overpowered Mary Sue, and they continued to butcher the license. Okay, I don't know how the 6 movies were allowed to progress as far, okay? Because I wasn't just some dumb monkey that was going to sit there in the theater for every single film. The only film I saw in the theaters was Resident Evil Afterlife. Okay? And, I mean, after part 2, the way they made Nemesis into a fucking pussy, the way they butchered the mansion incident, the way they butchered the live-action adaptations of characters. The problem with the Resident Evil, the 6 live-action movies, was it was just a fantasy power project for a dude trying to give his wife fame. That's really all it was. Those movies were Resident Evil in name only, but none of it was Resident Evil. okay? Every time I saw those movies, I was just watching cosplayers cosplay my favorite characters. And they would be pushed to the side for someone who didn't even exist in the video games. Now, here's an argument that I will give you. The first Silent Hill movie, which later down the line trashed at first but also became an underrated classic. Those movies did change the lead protagonist from the father to a mother. But here's the kicker. That movie actually made her go through an arc that by the end of it, though she was an original character, everybody rooted for her by the end. If I remember correctly, the woman's name was Rose. It's been a long time since I've seen Silent Hill, the first movie. But everything about that movie kept the heart of Silent Hill intact, kept the vibes, the world, the overall essence of Silent Hill. And if you make changes to a license, especially to a video game license in live action, you at least need to maintain the heart and the soul of what made it great in the first place. But the problem was, idiots, and I'm going to call it for what it is, fucking idiots are why people kept getting the shitty live action films, the first 6 shitty live action films. And a lot of people also don't want to admit this, but lucky you have someone like me who's going to be honest about this shit, is all the Resident Evil movies after Resident Evil Apocalypse were financial bombs. They didn't turn a profit. They were utter failures. But yet they kept getting made. I don't know how many dicks Paul W.S. Anderson had to suck to get those films made, but all those films after part 2, because the only reason part 1 and part 2 were so successful because people were desperate to see a live action adaptation, okay? That's all it really was. Once you saw how they butchered Resident Evil 2 and 3's plot lines for Resident Evil Apocalypse, you had to know where it was going from there, okay? Then Resident Evil Extinction came out. Bomb. Why do you think it took so long for Resident Evil Afterlife come out? Why do you think it took so long in between for Resident Evil Retribution come out? Why do you think it took a while before the final chapter came out? They had to reaccumulate the loss in funds because they made those movies at a fucking loss. Do you not understand that? Those movies were made at a fucking loss. And I know how shitty those films are. You're probably going to wonder, well, John, if you didn't see them in the theaters, how didn't you watch them? It's called when you're in high school, you'll always learn a way to watch something illegally on the internet. It's not that hard. And they would come on TV, or they would be on demand, or they were on Netflix in the early days, at least the first 4. Because then I saw 5 later, I saw 6. I had to sit through those movies. Hell, not that long ago, what was it? I think it was like a couple of weeks ago. My niece and my mom had never seen the live action films, so they wanted to sit through all them because all those shitty movies, you know where they're at? Because that's where they fucking belong, on Tubi. You know your movies are shit if they end up on Tubi. And I know people are going to say, well, there's classic movies. Yes, Tubi is made for cheese and campy movies, okay? But Resident Evil, those 6 movies, even the animated movies, I can understand why the animated movies are there. You know, that's a good place to watch them. But when you have your movies that were not even big at the time, and here's the sad part. Every time a Resident Evil trailer would drop, did the studios not get a fucking hint that those movies were gonna bomb and fail? Like, I just really wonder what went through their heads. You know, so we had gotten the final chapter a few years ago. And right after that, the studio was like, you know what? How about we listen to the fans? How about we listen to the fans for once and give them a faithful, or at least I would say 70% faithful adaptation with 30% of changes, because it's Hollywood. They're always going to make changes to something. At this point, there's no such thing as a faithful adaptation anymore. There's never no such faithful adaptations exist. Everything will either get altered or change. Why? Because modern audiences, even audiences back then, audiences are just fucking stupid. Okay? You can't ask an audience to use their brain. Asking them to use their brains for something, it's like asking them, well, why do I gotta read a book? Well, motherfucker, if you don't want to use your brain or at least have a basic understanding of what you're watching, then get the fuck out of the theater. The movie's not for you. So, I followed the production of Welcome to Raccoon City from the stills. Yes, it was going to be made low budget. Why? It was going to be made low budget, and that's why I accepted it the way it looked, whether it looked cheesy or not. One, that's faithful to Resident Evil. Resident Evil 1, especially the live action intro, looked like a budget horror cheese film. And why do you think it grew such a legacy? Because of that. You know, think about it. Think about that for a second. Then the trailers came out. When I saw those trailers, I assumed that the Resident Evil fan base would have got together and finally cheered. They would have been like, you know what? Despite some caveats, this movie looks like it's going to have the heart and the soul of Resident Evil. And yes, it fucking did. But then guess what happened? I don't know what bizarro world we were living in last year, but then the Resident Evil franchise, or the fans of the franchise, even all these Resident Evil channels that are, you know, supposed to be credible, spat in the film's face. They spat in the film's face. So, let me tell you something. You know what you did? That's why I'm not just going to hold Netflix accountable. I'm holding all of the Resident Evil community accountable for this. Every single one. This show that came out is not just Netflix's fault. It is your faults. Why? When you were actually given something that held the heart and the soul, that actually looked, sounded, the fucking plot lines, though altered a little bit, not even a whole lot. The problem with what people were doing, they were taking minor nitpicks and they were turning it into full-fledged criticisms to justify their bitching. Okay? Then the movie came out. Not one fucking person said anything positive about it. And guess what? This is the one time I'm actually going to give media outlets credit. They all said the movie was good. Even though you can tell most of these media outlets are paid shills and all that. But guess what? They must have been able to see it for what it was. It being close to its license. Close to what it was. Faithful to its universe. I don't know why the Resident Evil fandom couldn't do that. Maybe they were drinking too much of the Mila Kool-Aid. Okay? Maybe they were drinking too much of that overpowered Mary Sue's flat-chested ass. Not me. I saw the movie multiple times, studied it, analyzed it, despite some of the changes that were in the film. That film will always be, and I bet you anything, I could bet money. This is why there are times where I don't like to be right, because I want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, but there are just times where I need to just sit back and laugh and tell you that I was fucking right. Just to throw it in your face that I was fucking right about this. Resident Evil Welcome to Raccoon City will go down as an underrated classic and will be the only one film faithful to his license, faithful to a live action adaptation. But unfortunately, we're not going to get any more because of that. Why? Because of the fault of the fans. Because of the fault of every person that bitched, moaned, and complained. And every time I listen to these people talk about the film, or I've seen the reviews back then, I was like, what is wrong with you people? Like, are you guys not even doing your jobs and looking at it from top to bottom? Because most of the reviews I've seen, it's basically they went off their own first viewing, which is not how you do a review. You need to give it maybe 2 or 3 watches to see if your emotions changed and felt. And guess what I heard amongst all those reviews? That they're only gonna watch it once. Well, guess what? That makes your opinion irrelevant. Because at least I watched the movie 2 to 3 fucking times. I'm actually trying to get a hold of a Blu-ray version, but it keeps end up getting sold out at Walmart. You know what's funny? For people who said they didn't like the movie, that movie seems to sell out on Blu-ray and DVD a lot. You know, I really hope that the studio, because what's funny is, this is where it's also the fault of studios. You didn't have a problem letting the director make 6 live-action shitty films knowing they were going to bomb, but you're not going to carry that same energy over for this one? Because here's your logic, and here's the logic how it went for the other Resident Evil films. It was like this. Critics bashed it. Oh, everybody talked shit about those movies. They did, but the studios were like this. No, fuck you, we're going to make another one. This one is shit. No, fuck you, we're going to make another one. Well, you guys need to stop making. No, fuck you, we're going to make another one. This movie comes out, Welcome to Raccoon City. Everyone bashed it like the idiots they were. And the studio's like this. Well, guess what? Fuck you, we're not going to make another one. And then Netflix, with their grubby little fucking hands, the same company that made basically child porn called Cuties, you handed it off to them. Oh, but now, this is where I'm going to say no. No. The Resident Evil community, no. You can't take back what you said now. Because now I see everybody on the internet saying, perhaps we treated Welcome to Raccoon City too harshly. No, you fucking think? You guys ruined any potential continuation we could have had. Because the director, at least he had a fucking plan. If you actually watch behind the scenes stuff or the videos on YouTube explaining what he wanted to do with this fucking series, yes, he might have fused the events of Resident Evil 1 and 2 together, but when you really think about it, Resident Evil 1 and 2 are not even long games to begin with. Like I said, what makes a Resident Evil game long? The player not knowing how to do the puzzles. Okay? You have to solve the puzzles. But if you just took the puzzles and the gameplay out and just used the story cutscenes from classic Resident Evil 1 or Resident Evil Remake and then Resident Evil 2 and 2's Remake, the cutscenes are not even that fucking long. They barely crossed into an hour-long film. So I accepted that caveat of having the two events merged together. Because the director said that he potentially wanted to do a Code Veronica movie. Or a Resident Evil 4 movie. Well, guess what? We will never fucking get that. Okay? And again, yes, I blame studios for this shit. Because you should have did it right the first time. How fucking hard is it for you to just make a Resident Evil movie without fans bitching and complaining? Okay? And to the fandom, why were you so fucking harsh on this movie? Because all the reasons I've seen at best that they all tried to give were minor. They were just minor bitching. But somehow the studios took minor complaints and took that shit to fucking heart, because all the complaints I heard people say about it can either be explained or debunked at best. And I've been able to I did that with my videos talking about, I made multiple videos talking about Welcome to Raccoon City. You know, then you had idiots, like I said, idiots support the Mila films. Look, like I said, if you call yourself even a respectable Resident Evil fan, you would have not supported the first 6 live action films. Or at least I'll give you credit, I'll give you some slack because of the first 2, because at the time people were starved for a live action adaptation of 2. But after that is where you should have been like, yeah, you know what, maybe let's not. Nope. Guess what? You told the studios this was okay. And this is a time where a fandom needs to be held accountable. Okay? You all need to be held accountable for this. Because we could have had something great. We could have had at least a live action series that was fairly faithful. Not beat for beat, because I don't care what people say, there will be no such thing There is no such thing as a perfect adaptation. And if you say there is, show me. And every time I've said that, nobody can fucking show me. Okay? Because anytime someone tells me there's a faithful adaptation or anything, I will call bullshit on it. Live action adaptations are never faithful to anything. There's always changes. And even if it is faithful, just as much as it is faithful, there is something that deviates just as much. Okay? I had to sit through 8 fucking episodes of Resident Evil. Netflix's Resident Evil. And the fact that they even tried to tie it to the video game universe. There's so much shit in that show that contradicts the video games, and they went ahead and erased Resident Evil 7 and 8 like it was nothing. And you guys are okay with this? No, the show is not even barely fucking decent. It's not even acceptable. It's an abomination to man fucking kind. There's really only 2 people that hold that show together, and that's Lance Reddick and the chick that plays the adult version of his daughter Jade, because those 2 had to work with what they were given. But since it's Netflix, they're probably like this. Okay, Resident Evil. What is Resident Evil? I don't know. How about you look at the first video game? You could give me chance. Like, here's the thing. If you would give me the chance, Netflix, to have written a script for Resident Evil, I would have written the first video game successfully. And I would be like this. This is exactly what the fans want. Okay? They don't want this new Raccoon City bullshit. They don't want this telling 2 different stories from 2 different times, period. Okay? And again, you did the same thing that the Paul W. Anderson films did. You just shoved in references and monsters and BOWs and potentially killed all the Resident Evil characters because they don't even show up. Only Wesker. You race change. Like, here's the thing. Not knocking Lance Reddick, but why did you even have to race change Wesker to begin with? Like, why? It didn't even make sense. And then of course you have to do your LGBTQ pandering. That doesn't even exist in the world of Resident Evil. But nope, you had to force it here and make who technically at this time you make it Evelyn Marcus, which means Spencer doesn't create Umbrella. It was James Marcus who got killed in Resident Evil 0. Do you fucking understand me, Netflix? Do you understand the stupidity of your Resident Evil show? I don't know whose idea it was to greenlight it, and I don't know who at Capcom, because here's the thing, it's a licensed product at the end of the day, so somebody at Capcom had to approve of this shit. I don't know how you approved of this show when you're redeeming the video games right now, you know, with the remakes. Like, if this is what the remake timelines are leading up to this show, then you know what? I'd rather them continue the direction that Resident Evil 6 was going in. Because at least you can say what you will about that, but at least that is more faithful to its world than this fucking show. I mean, just because you put the monsters, guns, referencing lines, referencing events, we're not dumb monkeys. Well, I'm not a dumb monkey, and maybe some others are not, but most movie-going audiences and TV viewers today are retarded fucking morons to begin with. That's why we constantly get shit put on TV. But Netflix, I don't know how hard it was for you to do this. It's like, make a faithful adaptation, but it's almost like your hand shakes and you start to freak out. You're like, a faithful adaptation. We gotta put some changes. We can't just do a faithful adaptation. Even though we know the fans are not gonna like it, we're gonna do it anyway. But then here goes the Resident Evil fandom. What the fuck was Welcome to Raccoon City? This isn't Resident Evil. This isn't that. This isn't that. Shut the fuck up. Okay? I hold both sides accountable for this shit. Yes, I hold both fucking sides accountable for this, and I will continue to hold both sides for this. There is nobody that can argue that fact. There will be nobody that can argue Welcome to Raccoon City anymore after this show. Yes, Resident Evil live actions have never had a high bar because, unfortunately, the Paul W.S. Anderson films fucking exist. So they basically had dropped the bar to just a basic level, if barely even that. And you could say what you want. I could fucking debate Welcome to Raccoon City with somebody and come out on top. Lord knows I've already have in my comment sections. If you go to my Welcome to Raccoon City videos and there's idiots trying to defend the Mila movies, I easily destroyed their fucking arguments and flipped their logic upside their fucking heads. Okay? Until somebody has it in them to either continue the Welcome to Raccoon City storyline and make a sequel to that, that is as close as we will get to good live action Resident Evil. It had the characters. Yeah, granted, some of the characters were different actors, but here's the thing. You can have a character changed as long as they have the heart, the soul, and the essence of the character. Okay? And if a lot of people don't understand, I'm going to point out another thing. Does anybody remember Resident Evil 1.5? The original version of Resident Evil 2? Good. If you don't, look it up. They drew a lot from that version of the story for the film. And I think, you know what? That's actually a better place to present that story than in video game format. Because I don't want them to change the Resident Evil 2 that we had gotten. Hell, Resident Evil 2 Remake, a game that I was concerned about, holds up neck and neck with classic. If not in a lot of areas, it was better than the classic Resident Evil 2. And that's tough for me to say. And that's a hard pill to fucking swallow. But at least the director behind that film had passion. The actors had passion for the characters they were playing. You could say it's goofy, shitty, cheesy. Well, guess what? If you bitch about that, if you bitch about all of that, then you never understood the first game, the second game, and the third game. Okay? Then you never... Hell, you probably never even fucking played it. And people were like, whoa, all these Easter eggs and shit. Well, guess what? Where the 6 shitty live action films and the Netflix show just throw Easter eggs to make dumb monkeys happy, at least the items from the video games were used in the movie the way they were supposed to be fucking used. The Easter eggs were actually pivotal to the plot line. They were actually part of the story. And if you're going to do Easter eggs at all, that's how you fucking do it. You integrate them into the storyline. You make them feel organic and part of the story. Okay? And I will say it again. At least in that film, the BOWs and the zombies and all that looked more faithful, acted the way they were supposed to, and hell, they even explained how the rules of the T-Virus work. That's the only movie that actually got the T-Virus 100% perfect. And the G-Virus. I mean, it's the only movie where we actually have William fucking Birkin in his transformations. And yes, I will be the first one to admit, the CGI made him not look the best. But guess what? The fact that we actually got it at all is something the fans should have been grateful to see. But no, because of what all of you had done to Welcome to Raccoon City, too fucking harsh on it, and most of your arguments don't even hold up and they fall apart like wet paper bags, you told all the companies and studios that it was okay to butcher the license even more. You were given an opportunity to support at least a 70% faithful adaptation, and you caused the live action adaptations to now fall down a fucking well with the Ring Girl. Okay? This is Netflix's fault, and this is all of your faults. Both sides are held accountable for this bullshit adaptation of Netflix's Resident Evil. And that's a straight up fact that no one can argue. You had an opportunity for a good series, at least a decent live action series, and nope, you just buried it forever. I mean, there's not much more I can say about this. I already ranted and raved in a live video, in a live stream, and this will probably be my last one on it. If you guys seen the show, you guys tell me what you think in the comments below. If you're an actual Resident Evil fan. If you're an actual fan, you'll understand what I'm saying. If you like the 6 live action movies, then look, you can like them all you want, but you can't call yourself a Resident Evil fan because those movies are only Resident Evil in name only. Everything about it are garbage, abominations to fucking mankind. And no one's gonna be able to debate or challenge that fact. So, yeah. That's pretty much all I gotta say, everybody. You know, I don't even know. That show pissed me off royally. It really fucking almost made me question my love for the series and where it could possibly go in the future. But we'll see what happens. Knowing Netflix, they won't have the sense to cancel the show. They'll probably continue the shitty ass show anyway. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. I got all that on my system. So, it's a sad day, man. It's a sad day. Welcome to Raccoon City. You will always be the superior live action film, and no one can fight that, because that's a straight up fact. This is your Emperor John Kill 3D. Be sure to like, subscribe, favorite, and I'll be sure to catch you on the next video or live stream. See you later.